is your Pan-African show called Afreeqa with your host Ghazala Seifu. We have an exciting guest for you today. Thank you again for joining us. Could you please introduce yourself, even though you don't need an introduction?
My name is Jorga Mesfin. I'm a musician. I play saxophone and piano, and I play jazz music, Ethiojazz music, compose.
Now, besides your musical, now I'm going to take you a little bit back. So if you could please, just in case, and I'm sure there will be a few people that don't know who you are or how you got to where you got. So if you could just take us back a little bit, high school, how you got into music, and all that journey before you chose that particular instrument.
When I was 12 years old, there were many jazz records in the house, and I was playing those records and pretending to play on the piano, on the table though.
Okay.
I was just pretending. And my mother walked in and saw me just playing the table, you know. And so she asked around, and she found out that the Yared Music School had after-school program that started at 5 p.m. and ended at 6. So she enrolled me and my sister in the piano class. Azra Abata was our teacher. So every day after school, we would go and play, you know, Yared Music School. So that went on for 2 years. After that, my mother got a job in India. She worked with UNICEF. So when I went to the high school there, the high school had all the instruments. They said, choose what you want. And I always loved the sound of the saxophone, so I chose saxophone. They gave me one. And that's when I first touched the instrument.
Okay.
So that was in 10th grade, so I played for 2 years. The high school had a jazz club.
Okay.
And I learned the instrument there. When I was 16, I moved to the US for college. And the same thing, the college had a jazz club that met every Thursdays. So I started playing every Thursday, and that became my day for music. And that's why, till this day.
It's very interesting you said that. Thursdays are your days.
Thursdays have been my music days, mostly.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your musical influences and how they have shaped your unique sound?
When I was growing up in Ethiopia, like every child, I listened to the radio. So I listened to all the main singers, Talahun, Kasasa, Aster, Mahmoud, you know. Kasat Sama was big in our home. And also the music of Dr. Mulatu. But I had more African-American jazz records than I had Ethiopian. So every time an Ethiopian cassette would be released, I would buy it and listen to it. But that was like maybe 10 a year in those days, right? So I listened to many more jazz records. And I was always interested to learn that music, but also find its Ethiopian identity, you know, like, so I listened to all the saxophone players from here. Getachew Mokria was big. I listened to Yared Tafara, and I listened to Mogas. I didn't know his name, but I later found out that it was his playing.
Okay.
Talai was also another big saxophone player that I listened to. And throughout my teenage years, I'd always experiment on the Ethiopian scales, but the sound was more the American saxophone players, like. And over the years, I'm trying to relearn the Ethiopian sound now.
That actually is the second question. That's the next question. How do you incorporate Ethiopian music and cultural elements into your compositions and performances?
Well, it's like, I have an interesting story. You know, one time I was in New York City, and a friend of mine invited me to dinner, and he knew I was coming, so he played some Ethio-jazz music, you know, and he described it as soft. He said Ethio-jazz is softer than American jazz. And that was very interesting for me. And over the years, I realized that Ethiopian music is created in a place where there's no colonial influence.
Right.
And there's no like racism that you fight against. Whereas the American jazz had to fight its way through a lot of oppression and racism. So there's that anger and this need to prove that the music is equivalent or better than European music. So the American jazz musicians really focused on technique, and there was a lot of competition. Whereas the Ethiopian musicians are not really into the technique. It's more like melodic expression and sounding like the voice and being relevant to Ethiopian audiences, you know.
It's very interesting.
That's very interesting, and I'm still dealing with the balance, you know. Where does, when you say Ethiojazz, like how much of it has to be technical and how much of it has to be melodic and easy to listen to, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What challenges have you faced as a saxophonist and producer in the Ethiopian music industry?
I mean,
hold on. Before this question, because I think it's good to actually talk about the industry before this question actually applies. So we do have an industry, that we know we have an industry. And if you could tell us to what extent the industry has actually helped you as a musician and any other musician, what is the industry's responsibility?
when you say industry, like it's a very wide term, like because there's so much variety in the music that's performed here, from the Asmari Beit to, you know, the nightclubs, the governmental theater organizations, you know. So I think everybody finds their own niche. I haven't been playing nightclubs, so I wouldn't know about that scene. But within Ethiojazz, I think now is a very good time. Like a lot of young musicians are coming up, and there was a time when you wouldn't even hear a drum, like drum machines had controlled the city, you know.
Yeah.
But now everywhere you go, you see full bands, and having a jazz band is accepted, and people respond to it, you know. So in that sense, I think the scene is growing. But for the amount of influence Ethiojazz has over the world, I think we should have jazz festivals and, you know, bigger endorsement for the music. And I think that would allow for younger musicians to experiment and find a comfortable living, and also explore the music without feeling the stress, you know.
Right.
It's helped that I've done movies and studio work and documentaries, you know.
Can you share a memorable experience or performance that had a significant impact on your career?
I mean, the first time I played with Gash Mulatu was pretty memorable.
Right.
It was a club around Wollo Safar, and it was I didn't sleep that night, you know. It was very exciting.
How did it happen? Was it something that you had expected, or it just
No,
happened?
I knew he was playing there, so I took my saxophone and I said, "Can I play with you?"
Oh, beautiful.
And he allowed me on one song, and that was very incredible. Meeting Abagazu Shuota for the first time in New York City when I was 16.
Wow.
And I traveled to New York City to meet him.
Brilliant.
And you know, he took me into the studio. He showed me how he does what he does, and he was working on a Muluk and Malas's remix CD at the time, and it was very. It's just the way he welcomed me and his openness kind of became my approach to other musicians too. Working with Haile Gerima and Eza was also very incredible, intense experience.
That's a conversation on its own.
It is amazing.
Because that's a whole other conversation, Jorgi. That's a question on its own, but I'm glad you touched on it.
So that was amazing as well. Another very beautiful experience was the Nile project. That also was a 3-year experience with musicians from 11 countries from around the Nile, and living with them, learning their music. I mean, that changes you for life, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's also another experience that I think we need to talk about in detail, because just being away and being in an atmosphere that is comfortable for you musicians to be together and to just come up with stuff. I mean, it can't get better than that.
Yeah, it was pure joy. And also very educational, because especially, for example, the Ugandan musicians would bring an instrument to Egypt, you know. It's called adungo. It looks like a boat, but it's like a karar, but it's shaped like a boat, you know. So when they brought that instrument to Egypt, the Egyptian musicians freaked out. They're like, oh, this thing exists, you know, because they had only seen it in the pyramids.
Wow.
On pictures on the pyramids. They didn't know the instrument existed. But yet, it's obviously, that speaks about also who might have built the pyramids. You know,
that's very interesting.
There is an instrument called adungu, which comes from Rwanda, from Uganda. So this is adungu, a simple instrument as you see, skin and wood, and it sounds like this.
So that kind of like discovering of each other. Also another very interesting thing I learned tuned up was about improvisation outside of the American jazz style, you know, because that is its own language, its own culture. But when you go to Ugandan musicians, they have a very rhythmic approach to even melodic instruments. And then when you go to the Egyptian musicians, their approach to improvisation is philosophy itself is like totally different. Like, for example, they'll start on one note and exhaust all the possibilities on that note before moving to the next note.
Wow.
So it's like, it's not like American jazz. And it really opened my eyes and ears, you know.
Wow.
Like there's so many ways to approach.
I know that has to make you as a musician a better musician and also a better listener.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you can listen and just understand where to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was just an eye-opening experience and something that, you know, every human being should experience to live with another, and especially when we talk about Pan-Africanism. When musicians get together, they have this language to communicate and make all the other differences irrelevant, you know?
You know, when I went to Morocco, actually, that was one thing I wish I was a musician.
Really?
Because with every musician that I would go see, especially in the caravan when everybody would come and they would be just jamming. You know, I'm just in there with my etan. You know, and I'm like really into it. But if I had an instrument and if I was able to express myself the way all these different musicians were doing that, it's just a remarkable gift that you guys have. Absolutely remarkable. So, how do you approach the process of composing and producing music? What inspires your creative process? Because I know now you've also started producing. So maybe this is where I should ask you if you could tell us a little bit about Muzikawi. I think Muzikawi is one of the projects that you have recently started. Not recently, but so if you could take us through that journey and what have you been doing and how is it going?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two ways to create music. One is like use sounds in the computer that sound like real instruments, and then you can arrange it in the computer. It's called MIDI-based music. And then the other is to have real musicians come in and practice the music and record it. So on projects like Muzikawi, which was sponsored, it's actually a Salam Ethiopia project, and I was the musical director for that. You know, we had musicians from Somalia, not Somali, but Somali, the region, from Ari, from southern Ethiopia. We had Wolaita singers, you know, and to listen to the music and then adapt it to the instrumentation that's there is very exciting, and that's what the project allowed us to do, basically, is to have a better refined sound, but make it comfortable for the actual performance that come from these regions. Overall, like, I believe that music has healing qualities. So if you step away from the computer, you get better sounds that actually, if there's a vocalist that supports the vocals, but the vibrations are in there that are like, the body can feel it, you know? Yeah. You see, like, the computer, that's, you can't do that. Yeah. And I like my friend said, you know, that what makes music soft, what makes music hard, you know, like, so I enjoy producing, you know, softer sounds that are like relaxes the human body. You know?
Right. Yeah. And we can feel it.
Yeah. As far as composition goes, like, I still feel I'm a student to it because there's so many different approaches to it. So when I do film music, it's usually like you're going after an emotion, you know, what the scene requires, and trying to keep the suspense, like the audience engaged in the storytelling. So it's not necessarily to show what you can do.
Yeah, it's following.
Yeah, it's more following the story and making sure the audience stays engaged.
So let's get back to Eza. So as a musician, I mean, being able to have your music played, I guess it's called scoring.
Yes.
If you are asked to actually do that, how, first of all, how do you even get to be in that category? Like, how do they find you? I mean, I know this is an Ethiopian and you're an Ethiopian, but in the whole scheme of things, in the bigger thing, if people want to get into that, what is the best way to get into it? How is it that you need to bring yourself as a musician out and say that I'm available for whatever you want to do? And then as a musician, when you are asked, how do you follow? How do you know that what you're doing is right even? Because the way you just explained, you know, Teza, is like, how did you know that that was what was needed? What if you were on the other extreme? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think with that, it was a lot of, I think, good luck, you know. The first thing that a musician does is record and share your music, you know.
Exactly.
At the time, there was no social media, so I would do CDs, you know, burn CDs of my music and send it to friends. And just one of my friends, I sent it to was Heran. And she's good friends with Gashaile, and she played it for him in the car.
That was it?
That was it, you know. I had never done a movie before that.
That was your first?
That was my first. So it's really about a match, like, because if he had asked me to do something else, I probably wouldn't have been able to. But what I knew how to do was a sound that
worked beautifully.
It made sense to him. And I actually moved to DC and set up my studio under his studio for 7 months.
Wow. So you were literally inside the movie.
I was inside the movie. So I'll play and record every day. You come down, you say, no, this is not good. It's trash, you know. So I would just do it again the next day, do a different one. You'll come and say, okay, give me this one. So I have to give him credit. Like, I've done about 8 movies after that. And all of them was like they give me the movie, and I'd watch it and I'd play along with it. But with Eza, I wasn't like that. He never gave me the actual movie. You just come down, listen to my music, and he would know where to put it. So I also learned how to put music into movie from the way he chose the places, you know.
You know, that's interesting you said that, because I had a conversation with a movie director once, who was a Nigerian director. And one of the questions I had asked him was, do you do the music after you finish the film? Or when do you have the musician actually come and you work with him? And he said, from the beginning. From the beginning. You cannot just have you insert the musician in the middle or at the end. You have to be part of the whole project. So you have to be there from beginning to end. And that's what he did with you.
Yeah, that's what he did, but
that was a different way.
That was the only movie that actually did that. Usually in our country, though, it's like they come
with the film.
With the film, and by that time they're exhausted and their funds have depleted.
Exactly. So what do you like? I think this is a good time to also, you know, put it out there. When we do make movies, we have to give place to the music also. Music should be as big as the rest of the things that they put in there.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. Are there any specific themes or messages you aim to convey through your music?
Yeah, I mean, it's the way I understood jazz music. It's about seeking freedom, seeking newness, and seeking like your own voice. And it's your journey that you're playing to the audience. And it's like, so some of my heroes like John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, they were constantly searching throughout their life, for new possibilities of sound. So that has been one of the things to communicate is the possibilities of how to respond to music. And then there's also the freedom to express yourself as you understand it. Like, so I learned over the years when I listened to Ethiopian saxophone players, especially like Getachew Mokre, that he expressed himself in the shillala and the ambasal. Like he didn't necessarily need to play outside of Ethiopian scales and the language. Whereas Ethiojazz, like it gives you freedom to mix, to play outside the pentatonic, the 5 notes that Ethiopian music scales are usually constructed in. So until now, it's been about the balance of identity. Like somebody who grew up in the U.S., listening to African American jazz and how you respond to Ethiopian scales, and you've heard it. I mean, it's been an interesting journey, and but I also believe in evolution and change. So now I'm trying to understand better how Ethiopian saxophone players have approached the instrument and the melodic intricacies and how the identity is not in necessarily playing a lot, but in expressing a melody in a specific way.
What do you hope to achieve or contribute to the music scene in Ethiopia and beyond in the future?
So one of the things that we have made a point in our group is that we make it as comfortable as possible for traditional instruments like washint or masinko to incorporate themselves, like to even be a lead, and like to have the confidence to explore the instrument outside of the traditional bahal group sound.
Yeah.
So having people like Aso on washint in our group, I feel like has been a contribution to just give him that space for him to search the instrument. I think it made a difference in his musical journey.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things. The other thing is I collaborate with Tafari Asafa, who just released an album. We have a band called Nagarit. We perform together, and through that band and his research, we've looked into the rhythmic aspect, the rhythmic possibilities, because saxophone is a melodic instrument. But when I play with a musician like him, then I get to hear the research that's being done on the rhythmic side of Ethiopian music. And so I've recorded on that album with him. And I think I'd like to, learn more about composition.
In what aspect?
In terms of like orchestration for bigger than like 5 instruments, like having bigger bands, writing for bigger orchestras, and find ways to present that to the audience. We had a couple of shows at the National Theatre, as you remember. We collaborated with artists like Rofnan and Zaritu, and the concept was Ethiojazz Nation, like expanding Ethiojazz being a music style that can incorporate other styles. I also like to play with young, hip hop and Afrobeat producers and incorporate that with Ethiojazz.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the key elements, even though I think you have mentioned it above, but now that we are on Ethiojazz, what are the key elements that distinguish Ethiojazz from the other jazz styles?
Yeah, it's basically the balance between the Ethiopian melodies and the scales. And those are like usually represented by 5 notes. But in the harmony, you can choose from 12 different, the notes in all the scales.
Yeah.
So how do you accompany an Ethiopian melody idea with harmonies that are not restricted to the 5 notes,
Right.
And then you have to add the rhythmic elements and then the cultural elements. But I think it goes back to that concept that Ethiojazz is, my friend said it was soft. It's like it's a music that doesn't need to prove something. It's like it's understanding the country and its culture, and giving that on a plate that the whole world.
How would you describe the impact of Ethiojazz on the Ethiopian music scene and its global recognition?
I mean, when you go back, about 40, 50 years ago, when Ethiojazz was starting, it was not different from the pop music at the time, because you hear a lot of unauthorized arrangements and accompanying Mulikan Malasa, accompanying Girma Bayena, accompanying Mahamud Ahmed, like the popular singers at the time.
Actually,
So I think it didn't view itself as different. The music was, the impact on the local scene in the 40, 50 years ago was to be part of the popular music. It wasn't considered as different. So in this current time, if you ask me about the impact of Ethiojazz globally right now, I think it's really recognized as a genre in all the continents, really. Like in Japan, Europe, Latin America, they've heard of music by Mulatu Astatke, they've heard of music by even other young up-and-coming artists. And there's probably like 30 or 40 different bands that play.
I was just going to say that. That's what I read.
Yeah.
That are non-Ethiopian.
That are non-Ethiopian. Yeah. So the sound is catching, and the concept is catching on. It has made a contribution to the world scene.
Can you share a personal favorite Ethiojazz composition or performance that you find particularly compelling?
For me, it's from ones I was part of, the song Salam from the Udase album really touched my soul in a different way, because we only played it once like that, and it never sounded like that again. We tried, but on the recording it just came out very powerful, and it's something that I cherish to this day. And also Abba Garima, it's a song that from that album that I think really show how Ethiojazz can portray the culture. Like Stigrinya music, when you hear it, you hear the flutes and the scenery. You can actually picture it, From other artists, I think Adma's album, something that Abagas, Enoch, Teddy were part of. That really was a foundational album for me, and all the great recordings by Mulatu, of course. But I'm very excited to say that it's changing and evolving, and the latest album by that Nagarit Band Tafari is also something that I cherish, and I hope people can listen to. Yeah.
In your opinion, what makes Ethiojazz a timeless and enduring musical genre?
I mean, it has to do with Ethiopia itself, because it's such a rich cultural, melting pot for African culture itself, that it can be explored for many generations.
In many different ways.
In many different ways,
This is just one side. This is one side.
It's just, we barely scratched the surface.
It,
So as long as Ethiopia is relevant, and which is going to be, the Ethiojazz is also relevant. And but I think we could do a better job at producing it and making it available to global audiences,
Brilliant. So, you have gone through such different and diverse journeys, and you have come to this position now. Now you're here with me, so I would like to ask you for the upcoming musicians that are out there, because one thing that really touched me is the fact that when you went to, that was very compelling, and that really made an impact on your life, on your musical career, which was being surrounded with 11 different countries. Actually, I should say 10, you're the 11th. 10 different countries from 10 different musicians, 10 different instruments, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So I want you to tell the upcoming musicians how important it is to actually get out of our boxes We truly have to get out of our boxes. So I would like your advice to our upcoming musicians.
Yeah, I
As
mean,
I'm giving the advice.
Yeah, it was a wake up call even for me, because it's interesting that, you know, when I started being influenced by music that was not Ethiopian, it didn't start from my neighbor.
Yeah.
Like it jumped the ocean, went to America, you know, and that was the next strongest influence on my development, you know. But now that we're in an age where you can Google or YouTube what's happening in Kenya and Sudan and Egypt and, you know, and Asmara, Djibouti, like,
It's on your fingertips.
yeah, exactly. So it's not a bad idea to allow yourself to be open to what's happening in the neighborhood, you know, and start being influenced, you know, in a geographically, you know, way that makes sense. Like, you know, find out what your neighbor is doing before finding out what the Europeans or Americans are doing, you know.
Right.
So that experience with the Nile project really taught me that, like, wow, you know, entire musical philosophies exist right around the corner from where we are. And in a way I kind of like feel, you know, it's not too late, but I might have been too much into the American jazz, you know, expression. I loved it. I mean, it's not a regret, but there's so much more.
So much more. I know.
In our
and I
neighborhood.
think that's what they need to know. There's so much more
There
outside
is.
of our little boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jorga, for
Thank you,
coming
Kazui.
here
I
and giving
appreciate
me
it.
this
Thank you.
opportunity. And we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Again. This is your Pan-African show called Afreeqa with your host, Ghazal Seifu. Please tune in on Saturdays from 4 to 5 on Arts TV. Thank you again.